everyone! So this is going to be my January wrap-up, all the books that I read in the month of January, and it is 10 of them with 1 DNF. And I always try to do my wrap-ups in the order of enjoyment, so that's what we're going to do today, and we're just going to get right into it, because this is going to be probably a lengthy video. I'll try to keep my reviews short and succinct, but we'll start with the DNF. So that will be House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. To be fair, I don't know if I really gave this book a fair shot. I'm not gonna lie, I only read about 50 pages of it, and I just quickly realized that I didn't care anymore. I didn't really care about any of the characters. I didn't care about the world anymore. This is a humongous book, and I have a feeling that every book in this series will be humongous, and I don't want to be reading this. I don't want to be reading this for as long as it will take me to read it. I have so many other books I want to read instead. I haven't heard great things. Most of my friends hated this book, not just disliked it, hated this book. So I already didn't have a ton of motivation going into it. It started off with introducing us to a new character. I was like, oh, we're gonna have to follow this new character, and I'm gonna have to get the whole backstory. I was like over it. I didn't care. And I've seen a lot of people love it. It won the Goodreads Choice Award. I'm sure it's great. I've heard that the ending is like, what? But I just don't want to sit for weeks and weeks and read this book that I just really don't care about. Okay, and then starting with my least favorite of the month. This might be an unpopular opinion. I haven't seen a ton of reviews on this one yet, but it is The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy by Bannen. I gave this book 2.5 stars, which for me is pretty low. I was not a huge fan of this. This follows a Undertaker named Mercy and a half god, demigod, named Hart, who is I pictured them as zombies. There's zombies in this world, undead that come back to life through these demon souls that occupy these bodies, and Hart hunts them for a living, and so he has a lot of run-ins with this Undertaker Mercy, and they just hate each other from the start. They're mortal enemies. They just got off on completely the wrong foot, and something happens and they end up having an enemies to lovers relationship. The problem for me with this one was I just didn't buy it at all. First, the two characters, Hart and Mercy, were the most irritating characters. I got so annoyed with them. They did so many things that annoyed me so much. Hart, I guess, was a little bit better than Mercy. I really didn't like Mercy as a character. And then their romance itself. So, insta-love is I'm not a huge fan, but this was also insta-hate. So they went from insta-hate and hate, really didn't like each other. One thing happens, and then they have this whirlwind romance where they fall in love in 2 days. And the ending of this book is, I can see why people think it's sweet, but it just came off as so cringy to me. I just did not like this. It just didn't work for me. I will say the pacing of it was fine. This is, I would say it's more romance than fantasy. The fantasy elements of it were the fact that it didn't take place in our world, and there's this parallel world that you can go into where all of the creepy zombie things are. And I guess whatever. For me, that was such an unimportant part of the book. And so the world building, I didn't really find anything interesting about it. It didn't read like a fantasy to me. It read much more like a romance. So it just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. I like my fantasy to read fantasy. I like my romance to read romance. And I'm finding that I'm just not a huge fantasy romance gal, because I'm but give me more of the fantasy stuff. And if there's a little romance in it, then great, even better. But if it's romance with a little fantasy, I'm not as big of a fan of it. So Yeah, this one was just not for me, unfortunately. The next book I have is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. This is a novella that I read. I just heard the writing was very like beautiful and poetic and flowery. And it was beautiful. I will admit, like the writing style, the author's very talented. I just am not a reader that appreciates beautiful writing as much as someone else. So I prefer my writing styles very straightforward, very much to the point. I don't like being confused when I'm reading a story. And for me, like, the writing style did not work. It just isn't my personal preference. And so like the story itself, like this had really a cool setting, cool lore. It had cool characters, but because it's a novella, it didn't have a lot of time to flesh all of those things out. And the writing itself, I just didn't really connect to. So I gave this 3 stars. I won't be continuing on with the series. We also have Army of the Cursed by Karim Soliman. This is one that was sent to me so kindly for review by the author. This is self-published, and it was actually an SPFBO finalist, I think last year, the year before, I think it was 2021. But it says, everybody knew the cursed were coming, nobody knew how to defeat them. The Garanians thought that they were ready to face demons in battle, but when the foretold war of the last day begins, one fact becomes clear: the doom of mankind is just a matter of time. Now its fate rests in the hands of a hapless trio: a mage's apprentice who relies on her wits rather than magic, a princess who seeks the ultimate weapon against demons, but first she has to survive the turmoil of civil war, and a warrior whose swordplay could prove more useful against a threat graver than the bandits infesting his village. Can the 3 unite and put aside their differences before it is too late? The entire human race is already on the brink of extinction. So this had a great hook. It sounded very much like if you took the White Walkers from Game of Thrones and kind of put them at like the forefront of A Song of Ice and Fire. And I will say it delivers on that. You definitely get a ton of fast-paced action, just turning the pages, dialogue. This one I read in like 2 days because it was just so easy to fly through the pages. But I will say, for me, the weakest part of this book was the characters. I didn't know going into it that the 3 main characters were all going to be teenagers. So this actually read a little bit younger than I was expecting it to because of the characters' ages. And 2 of them are princess characters. So 2 of them had very similar kind of voices and were hard to differentiate from each other. For me, the characters weren't like characters that I absolutely loved, didn't really feel super invested in them. So by the time we get to, you know, these epic scenes and fights and the war, I just wasn't finding myself super invested in the outcome of these characters. I do kind of wish we'd had more of the preparing, but I will say, if you are looking for an extremely like fast-paced palette cleanser between like a lot of these like denser epic fantasies, this is such a good one to go to. I read it so quickly. It definitely had a pacing that had me turning the pages. I wanted to know like what's going to be the outcome of this. I just, at the end of the day, didn't feel as much investment in like the characters of the world that I was hoping to. So I gave it 3 stars. It's still one that if it sounds good to you, definitely check it out. The next book I have is The Warrior by Aryan. This is the 2nd book in the Quest for Heroes duology. So it started with the Coward, then we got the Warrior. I gave this 3.5 stars. I felt very similar about the Warrior that I did with the Coward. Like while I was reading it, I was having a good time, but both of these books are very much like journey fantasy books where the majority of the time you are just on a journey with your main characters. So if you connect with those main characters, then journey fantasy is something that could potentially really work for me. For me, for both of these books, I found the characters well written, but I didn't find them characters that I really loved and was super invested in. So because it's a journey fantasy, we didn't have a lot of like the politicking. We had a little bit more of it, I think, in this one than we did in The Coward. But because we didn't have as much of that at the forefront of this, it just didn't really grasp me as much as I was hoping it would. So it wasn't necessarily any worse or any better than the first book. I still enjoyed my time with it. I was still glad that I read it, but it's not something that's gonna stick around with me. But I will say I do really like Stephen Aryan's writing. I really, really like his writing style. I find it very approachable. I find it very easy to fly through the pages. So this is an author that I definitely want to check out more from. So I know he has one coming out this year, another book coming out that I'm very interested in checking out. I have another book from him that was part of one of his backlist books, Battle Mage. So I really want to check out more of his writing because I think he has potential to write books that I absolutely love. But this particular duology just wasn't my favorite. Okay, now let's talk about the 4-star books that I had. And I will start with Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. So after finishing Home Before Dark, I had to go and pick this one up because Home Before Dark had the perfect amount of paranormal creepiness, and Lock Every Door sounded like it was going to be very similar, where it was going to kind of have this like haunted hotel and have some paranormal stuff going on. And I was very excited for that. I was wrong, so my expectations were incorrect going into this one, so I can't fault the book for that. But I will say that this particular thriller, it does take place at a kind of very popular, like not popular, but very, very like well-renowned, well-known like apartment building in New York City. And it's kind of got a lot of history associated with this apartment building, and kind of these elite people live there and they're very secretive. And you have a character who's kind of down on her luck. She's lost her job, she lost her boyfriend, she's staying at a friend's apartment, and she gets this opportunity to kind of apartment sit one of the open units that just became open in this apartment building. And she jumps at it because it's an incredible opportunity. It's going to pay really well. She's like, what's the catch? This is amazing. So I was expecting to get some paranormal stuff in the apartment building, and you do not. But I will say the twist at the end of this book was really good, and I did not totally see it coming. And I really liked our main character. I thought she did like one thing that I was like, how could you be so silly? Like, come on now. Like, she was very smart and very like competent as a main character, which I really appreciate in thrillers, except this one thing that she did that I was like, really? Come on now. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I like had to keep reading because I was so curious, like what was this big twist going to be? And I was very pleasantly surprised that I really did like the twist. It just wasn't my favorite Riley Sager. I still prefer Home Before Dark, but this is a very good one, and I can see why it's so popular. The next book is One of Us is Lying by Karim M. McManus. I listened to this one on audio and I gave it 4 stars, and I highly recommend listening to this one on audio because the cast of characters, it's told from 4 different points of view, 4 different high schoolers who all were in detention together. One of the students that was with them ends up dying, has an allergic reaction, and ends up tragically dying. And so these 4 students that were with him in detention are kind of immediate suspects in his murder. And you get in the audiobook a different narrator for each character. And I really liked all of the narrators. I thought they all did a really good job. And I really, really liked it. I was told that this was going to be Breakfast Club, but with murder. And it very much felt like that. I really was like not super into it at the beginning, but then as you kind of learn more and more about the characters, I started to feel like really invested in them, and I started to feel really invested in like their relationship and their group, and I like really ended up rooting for them by the end. I truly was like, who did it? Like, who murdered this kid? I was so curious. I did not know. And so the twist at the end I did not see coming, and I thought it was just paced really well. I will say it did drag just a little bit with some of the backstories of the characters. You get a ton of their backstories. So if you're looking for like this fast-paced, can't put it down, edge of your seat thriller, I don't think you're going to get that from this particular book. But if you're looking for a really great murder mystery with really compelling high school characters that like each of them you could like relate to parts of each of them, and you kind of like just really root for them and their group. There were some that I loved more than others. I will say my favorite's Addie, but overall, like, I just really enjoyed this. So now I really want to read the sequel. I have no idea what the sequel's about, but I'm like so curious to keep going with this author because I really liked all of these characters and the murder mystery, and I just thought it was really well done. The next book I have is my last 4-star book, and that is Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. So this is one that I had zero expectations going into because I'd heard some people review it and basically say it was just like super forgettable, middle of the road. And I gotta say, like, the beginning, I was not sold on it. It takes place on this island, and it's this very like small, secluded island where every year during the fall they get a lot of tourists because it's like got this beautiful orchard and pumpkin picking and like all these activities for the fall time. But then the rest of the year it's like a ghost town. It's very small. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody's in everybody's business. And you're following two main characters, one of which who has not lived on the island for like 17 years since he was a teenager in high school because he was potentially involved in this girl's murder. And then you're following another main character, the girl's best friend, who was dating this guy and was left alone on the island 17 years ago. And so you're kind of like trying to figure out what happened 17 years ago before this character left the island. So you kind of have this murder mystery at the center of it, but you also kind of have like this romance subplot because these two characters were like high school sweethearts and had this really deep love for each other, and then they were like torn apart, and now they're like coming back together, seeing each other for the first time. And so I will say I really liked this. I can't really tell you why. I don't know what it is about this book that I enjoyed so much. It's usually like this kind of book is not my kind of book usually because it was very slow, very atmospheric. It was all about the vibes and the setting of the island and these two characters and like how they pined for each other and like all these things. And I'm like not usually super into that, but for some reason it was done in such a way in this book that I really found myself enjoying. Once I was past like the first 100 pages, I was like, okay, wait, I'm kind of digging this. Like I really like this vibe it's giving off. I don't know what it is, but I like it. And then I really liked the romance between the two characters. I believed it. I believed that they had this like unbelievable love as high schoolers, this pining for each other and not having each other for so long. And I was just like, oh, I get it. I'm rooting for them. I feel it. I feel for them so much. I just believed it. I don't know why. I just did. And then the actual murder, I was like, who the heck did he do it? Did he not? Like, who did it? And I kept guessing and I never got it. This, I will say, came in a Fairy Loot adult fantasy book subscription box. There is nothing fantasy about this book. There might be a touch of magical realism. Okay, yes, there is something magical about this book, but it is not, I would not call this a like fantasy book that I would expect to get in like a fantasy subscription box. So I can see why if you're going into this thinking it is going to be an adult fantasy book, it's not. I would call it a mystery book that has some like magical realism aspects to it. So I think if you go in with the right expectations, You could really, really enjoy this. I don't know who I would recommend this to. It's slow, it's meandering, it's repetitive at times, but I just really liked the vibes and I really liked the characters and I just believed it all the way through. I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. So I gave it 4 stars. It's not a perfect book. I can see the flaws in it. And it took me a while to get into it, but once I was into it, I really liked it. I lied. I think I said I had one more 4-star book left when I talked about Spells for Forgetting. I have another one. My last 4-star book, for real this time, is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So I finally read it. I'm so proud of myself because I've been saying I was going to read this book for about 2 years now, and I did it. I really liked it. I can see why everyone loves Robin Hobb's writing. It truly is beautiful, and not in an overly flowery way where it was hard to understand what was going on or conceptualize things or visualize things. It was just beautiful in this very organic way that had you kind of transported into this world. So I was a little bit worried going into this one that everyone's saying, the beautiful writing style. I was a little bit worried that meant I was going to get lost and not escape and get lost in a good way. No, actually be lost, confused. Because sometimes with beautiful writing, it's so poetic that you're wait, what did that just mean? And it wasn't like that at all. So I had no reason to be intimidated. And it makes me feel much better about getting through the rest of Robin Hobb's books now, knowing that her writing style is beautiful yet still approachable. And I have heard that each book in this particular trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, gets better and better. So me giving this a 4 stars makes me very hopeful that I'm going to continue to love where the story goes. The thing with this particular book is the times I was enjoying it, I was so into it. There were moments and scenes with Fitz and with other characters that I was just so enraptured by. And then there were times where 10 pages would pass by and I would be so bored. It was so slow moving at times. So I will say it's a very slow paced story, but there are some really truly beautiful scenes in this story. And I like Fitz. He's not oh my God, the best character I've ever read about ever. I know some people love Fitz, and maybe I will feel that way if I continue to read more of his story. But everything he did made sense to me, why he acted the way he did, because he had such a tragic upbringing. So I just understood all of his decisions, and I felt like he was a really well-written character. I'm excited to see him older now. I can't wait to see him grow up from here now, because it did get a little exhausting reading from the child perspective, the childhood, because this was very much following early childhood into teens for Fitz. So I'm excited to see an older Fitz now. But overall, I still really enjoyed it. The ending had me very, very intrigued. I do feel the ending kind of happened very quickly with how slow the rest of the story is. It was all of a sudden everything happens in the last 50 pages. And you're whoa, that was a lot all at once. But I'm very intrigued by the story, and I'm excited to now see where it goes. Now I have a 4.5 star read and a 5-star read. I'm almost done. So my 4.5 star is Amari and the Great Game by B.B. Alston. This is the sequel to Amari and the Night Brothers, which I absolutely loved. 5 stars. It was my favorite middle grade fantasy that I've read, and this book was so much fun still. I don't think it was as fun as the first book. The first book had that, like, I love the journey of discovering a fun new world alongside a character. I think is always a fun experience. So we didn't get that aspect in this book because Amari's now fully in like this supernatural world and she's got the hang of it. She's got her friend group. We didn't have that kind of like discovery aspect like we did in the first book, which I think was part of why the first book was so much fun. But this book had this really good mystery around it. And what I liked so much about this particular book that I still really liked from the first book, but I think this book may have done it even better, was the friendships that Amari has with her classmates. She has a new friend that was a very unexpected friend. I really liked that friendship. And then the old friendships, like friendships in this book are very much friendships that feel like a found family. And I love that in middle grade so much. I love the magic in this book. I love the world, the supernatural world in it. And the mystery really had me guessing. I did not predict it. The first book I had predicted the ending, but it didn't take away from my experience with it. And this one I did not predict. So I had a lot of fun trying to guess like who was behind the big inciting incident in this one. And it leaves off like in a very unknown place. Like Amari is in a very interesting spot, I'll say, trying to avoid all spoilers. Very interesting spot where we leave off with this book. So I'm really curious how the next book is gonna go because oh my gosh, like the ending had me like shocked. So I love this series so far. I think it just has the perfect amount of whimsy and friendship and beautiful themes and just I love it. So highly recommend Amari. The last book I have is my 5-star book, and even though I only had 1 5-star, it feels like I had a great reading month still because I still enjoyed so much of what I read. But this book was so good. It's The Cuckoo by Leo Carew, and this one took me a while to read, but that does not mean I wasn't enjoying every second of it. It is very much a very political heavy and military heavy fantasy that almost reads more like historical fiction than it does fantasy. Like it doesn't have a ton of fantastical elements besides reimagining our own world. So if you're looking for like very fun, fantastical, magical fantasy, this is not the series I would recommend. But if you love very political and military type fantasies, then I would highly recommend Under the Northern Sky. I think each book got better and better in the series, and this ending, I can't imagine a more perfect ending for this book. This was an extremely like emotional roller coaster. There were so many twists and turns that I just did not see coming. There is a fantasy courtroom scene, basically like the equivalent of a courtroom scene in this, that I loved. I love the characters in this book. I think they're so well written. They're so intelligent. I love the fact that you got both sides of the war and you didn't really like know who to root for. Like I definitely think you were supposed to root for a certain side, but you could see where the other side was coming from. And like, I love that kind of stuff where there's not necessarily a good side. It's so good. I loved this book. I thought it was just brilliantly done, and the ending was epic. It was tragic. It was beautiful. It was like perfection. It just was the perfect way to end the trilogy. So this totally stuck the landing. Every book gets better. If you liked The Wolf, then I highly recommend you keep going because I think you'll love the rest of the series. If you didn't like The Wolf, maybe, don't keep going. But if you liked it at all, just know I think the rest of the books just get better and better. So those are all the books that I read in January. What was your favorite book that you read in January? I would love to know. So leave those comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.